Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Delighted that everybody seemed to like the first one and asked for a second one. So happy to be here. And I was able to corral another SeaWatch author, David Antscherl, to join us for this podcast. So happy to have David here. And David, thank you for coming and welcome.
Well, thank you very much for asking me.
And I think, I'd love to, you and I have worked together a little bit since I took over Sea-Watch, but I'd love to, I don't think we actually really got a chance to sort of know each other's history and things like that. And I'd love to just sort of understand your background, your early years. From what I understand, you had sort of an unusual route to professional ship modeling, starting in health sciences and then moving to performing arts. Can you walk us through how you got to become a professional modeler and your history.
Okay, I'll try and keep it fairly brief. Um, I was exposed to beautiful ship models at a very early age, living fairly near Greenwich and the Maritime Museum there. And I used to visit there with my father, who was very keen on things miniature as well. And there was also this wonderful thing, which I think still runs, called the Model Engineer Exhibition. It was an annual thing in London, and Dad and I used to go there. And I was really interested in models from a very, very early age, and I have evidence of that in the form of a school little picture journal that I did in the equivalent of about grade two. Um, and the very first entry in it says, I am making a ship model.
What was it? Do you remember?
Yes, it was the Mayflower.
Ah,
And months later, I'm still building. So I obviously had stick to itiveness at an early age. At any rate, so there was the usual childhood models from kits and so on. There were not that many kits post-war initially. More model airplanes, Keelcraft was fairly big.
mhm.
Uh, and I'd spend hours building one of those and then promptly crashing it. I figured there wasn't much future in that, so that's when I turned to ships.
And
At
so
any rate,
I was just
go
gonna
ahead.
say, like, what was, was it just the fact that they were there? I mean, had you been, I guess you were exposed to them at the museum and just
Yes.
kind of drew an interest there?
Yeah, and when I was about 12, 13, that was the first time they were starting to restore the Cutty Sark at
Mm,
Greenwich.
hmm
So I'd go down there and watch the progress on that as well. So that was some of my really early influences. A little later on, at one of the model engineer exhibitions, there was a ship modeler demonstrating there by the name of R.J. Collins, who was fairly big at the time. This would be the 1950s. And I spoke to him, and he said, well, next year, bring a model. So I took him at his word, and the next year I did bring a model up, which was pretty crude, actually. But he was very encouraging and said, you need to join a ship model club.
Mm.
And the nearest one was at that time the Greenwich District Ship Model Club. So I turned up there, and there were all these, at least to my childlike eyes, elderly people there who were probably all younger than I am now.
Right. So you were how old at this point? Like 16 or something? Or
No, I was about 13.
13. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, they were very encouraging as well and suggested there were better materials I could use than, you know, spills for lighting fireplaces, for planks and stuff like that. So that got me started. And they said, well, you need to do proper research. Go and see Len Tucker at the Maritime Museum. So, in my naivety and innocence, I trotted over to the museum, and there was the commissionaire in his uniform. And I said, I'd like to see Mr. Tucker, please. I'm sure he must have been bemused, if not amused. Anyway, he went up, and Len Tucker came down, and I explained why I was there. And he took me up to his offices and sat me down and asked what I was about. And then he took me into the drafts room, and there we were handling 18th century drafts,
Oh, wow.
real McCoy. There am I, what, 13, 14 years old. How lucky was I?
Yeah,
And he
absolutely.
said, I'll need you to get a reader's ticket for the cared library. So he took me down to the library, took me to the librarian, and she issued me with a reader's ticket. I was probably the youngest reader ever. And then he took me into the stacks and showed me how to research. So that gave me a wonderful grounding right there. So that was the beginning of it.
Oh wow. And so you didn't go right from there and say I'm going to become a professional ship modeler then. So your
No, not at
life, I
all.
assume, kind of did its thing and
It was a hobby.
uh
There were years when I couldn't do it. When I was at university, the courses were just too uh, time consuming for me to even think about hobbies.
right.
After university, I took up ship modeling again, and then I immigrated to Canada in 1968. And just before I left, I said to Len Tucker on one of my visits to the museum, um, could you sort me out a set of plans of a ship that, as far as you know, there's been no model of, that will take me a little while to build because I'm going away and not coming back for how long? And this is the beginnings of Polyphemus. He sorted out the plans of the 64 gun ship. Like, he knew how much work there was in it. I hadn't a clue at the time. So I had these plans when I arrived here, and I started working on them. So I began the Polyphemus in 1970. I didn't finish it till 2000.
Wow.
Now, 10 of those years, it was under wraps while my daughter was growing up.
Right.
I didn't even look at it. And the only reason I really finished it, it was nearly finished, was that my wife Carol encouraged me to put it into this international exhibition at Newport News in 2000. So I got it finished. We took it down, and that was an adventure in itself. And much to my amazement, because I was working in a vacuum at that point, it was really pre-internet. I had no idea how my model would stack up against anybody else's.
Hmm.
So I was really absolutely amazed when I won not one, but two awards there.
Mm.
Uh, and that sort of suddenly made me a big fish in a small pond, basically. Um, so I started to get hooked in with the Nautical Research Guild,
Hmm.
and I attended their conference in 2002, which is where I met Greg.
Okay.
We hit it off right away. We actually met in an elevator going up to our rooms, and he was carrying a model of Druid at the time, and we got chatting about it, and everything started from there. Um, I didn't get my first commission for a little while after that. I can't remember exactly how long, and I remember thinking through very carefully, did I want this to be a hobby or a business?
Hmm.
Would I lose the fun if it was something more serious than just a nice pastime for me?
Right.
And I agonized over that for a while. And I decided, well, I'll never know if I don't try. And off we went.
Oh wow. So I mean, you like fully ripped the cord or ripped the band-aid off and quit whatever you were doing and just went full into
No, I didn't rip the band-aid off because I was still doing graphic design at that point
Got it.
and theatrical design, and that ain't full time in each of them. So I was really juggling three balls to make a full time living at that point.
Got it. Okay. And going back to Polyphemus, correct?
Yes.
So that was that your sort of first kind of major build that you had entered into the contest, or was it like were there things that you were working on, while it was under wraps for a while?
No, I wasn't working on anything. What I had done, I had a model of a revenue cutter, which I'd started in England before I emigrated, brought it over with me, and the humidity is so different over here than there that all the wood dried and
Mm,
split. There were huge gaps in the planking, and I just had to chuck it. There was no rescuing it.
right.
That's when I started on Polyphemus.
Gotcha. And you pre-internet, so how did you handle the research on that? I mean, you just had plans. You must have had to do other research besides just the plans, right?
Yes, again, Len Tucker was very helpful. He photocopied a number of pages out of steel
Okay.
for me for scantlings and so on. So I did have access to that.
Gotcha. Okay. And
Oh, and also there was Longridge's Anatomy
okay.
of Nelson ships that was available that I had a copy of.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. And so then so going forward, so you met Greg, you decided that yeah, you can make a profession out of this. So what was your first commission? How'd that work? And so how'd you get your first gig?
Um, as in all of the gigs I've had, people approached me. I never solicited work. Um, so this was a model of resolution for a client who was a Captain Cook fan.
Hmm.
So that was the first one I took on.
Okay. And were most of the commissions, are they always full builds? Did you do any restoration work or curating or
Yes, I've done quite a few restoration and conservation
conservation?
pieces of
Sorry, not
work
curating.
over the years. It's sort of really, I was partly trained in that because I've also was trained in conservation and restoration of old paintings.
Okay.
So a lot of those skills are immediately transferable. So I've done some work for museums, mainly for private clients again.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And with the commission, so somebody approaches you, they want to do a build of something, a subject that's passionate to them or has meaning to them. How do you approach that? How do you sort of start a new commission or a new
Uh,
project?
to find out what the client's expectations are, really. There was one instance which was wonderful where the client said, I want a model, you choose the subject.
Hmm.
I had a blank canvas. And that was a slightly terrifying but wonderful.
What'd you end up choosing?
That was Comet.
Okay. And any particular reason or?
Because there are very few models of fire ships. The plans look gorgeous because they showed all the carved decorative work. And of course, fire ships layouts below decks are totally different than any other
Mhm.
ships were.
Right.
And it was fun to research that one.
And so that commission turned into the book you wrote for SeaWatch then, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was before Bob was had SeaWatch at the time. So but that's interesting. I didn't realize that. So
Yeah. Well,
um
well, the
go
whole
on.
story of how Bob came after me is an interesting one, which
Yeah, I'd actually like to dig into that.
if you like me to talk about that. What happened was that Greg realized that I had something to offer to the model making community. So he encouraged me to write about what I was doing and what I'd done, techniques, etc., etc. So he said there'd be other people interested in it. If you write it, I'll promote and distribute it.
Hmm.
I went, well, okay, because promotion isn't my thing at all, especially self promotion. So we agreed that I would write this 12-part series, which turned into the Swan Class, while Greg was building the model. So it was his guide to building it. And because he'd asked me to draft all the frame drawings for him because he
Hmm.
doesn't have the drafting background to do it. So I'd done this, and we started to produce these episodes at 3 monthly intervals for 3 years, and we asked people to subscribe on an annual basis. And I thought, well, okay, maybe we'll get 25 people if we're lucky. Well, Greg got over 100 people. And
Wow.
I was just amazed. This was, in the early 2000s. Um, After we'd been doing it about a year, I was at one of the uh, Nautical Research Guild's conferences. Bob buttonholed me and said he wanted to publish me. And I said, well, I've got this commitment to these 100 plus people. to produce this. I said, if you're still interested at the end of 3 years when I've finished it, then we'll talk.
Hmm.
He kept coming back and coming back and coming back, wore me down.
He was persistent.
Yes, absolutely. And that's how those Swan Class books came to pass.
Interesting. So that was your first publication with SeaWatch.
Yes.
Okay. And so you did that, and how, like, once Bob put the first run out there, like, how'd you feel? Like, what was kind of going through your head on this when you saw them come out?
Well, as again, I was a little skeptical how commercial it was, how well it might sell, and it sold. It keeps selling, so
Yeah, and
I can't argue with that.
and people ask it's I'm actually going to be reprinting all four of them this year. So I know I'm keep getting questions about that. So we'll have yet another run.
Wow, that's amazing.
And
It's really got legs.
it does. And as you know, we made ebooks versions of that this year, and they're selling too. So it's been great. So then you did Swan. What was the next one?
Oh gosh, there've been so many now. Which was the next one?
Well, let me
Uh,
actually rephrase it then. What, because you I think are Sea-Watch's most prolific author. Um, and we'll come to the most recent one soon, but what's been your favorite?
hmm, Generally, it's the next one,
It's the next one. I know it's probably asking like what child is your favorite, but
in a sense. But I see each one out there, and it's rather like, as you know, with the ship model, you complete it and you can see all the flaws.
mhm.
It's a bit the same with the books.
Yeah. So let's talk about Fubs because that was the most recent one we published.
Yes.
And I think it describes how you determine like the sandwich model of was indeed Fubs. I think that it sounds like there was some they didn't know what it was at first, and you and Effie Moneypenny were the ones that kind of determined it was Fubs. You want to talk about that?
Well, it was more Effie Moneypenny and Simon Stevens
Okay.
together that worked on that. Um, I was very peripheral to the research end of it because they're over there and immediate, and I'm
Right.
not. So they're the ones that should have the credit for the research into that and determining that, in fact, that was the precursor model before the FUBS was built.
Okay. And then how did you get involved? If they had sort of done the research, when did you get involved in the project?
Oh, okay. I was over in England and I was at Chatham um, and I wanted to do some research. This was for the Hailing Hoy at the
Hmm.
time. And I was only in England for about a week and a half that time. And I emailed Simon because I didn't know until the last minute I was even going over and said, look, I'd like to come down to Chatham. And if you've got some Hoy models for me to look at, that would be great. He said, well, I've got some other people coming down on the Wednesday, but you come along too. I said, no, I'm not going to come if you've got other people. He said, no, I'd like you to come. So Carol and I went down to Chatham that particular day, and Effie Moneypenny was there researching one of the Royal Yachts with another chap called Mike Bidgood, who lives in Sweden. And we were introduced. And I think Simon had engineered to get us to meet.
Okay.
Um, Again, we hit it off. And with her research skills and my sort of modeling and construction of ship backgrounds, it meshed really well. Um, so that was where we started to research the how it was possible that this business of the shipwright's wedge was used in the ship design in the 1670s, 80s. And it's a very interesting story. It's all tied in with the Royal Society, which was founded in the 1660s. And right here, actually, I have a model of the shipwright's wedge. As
I
you
didn't
see, if
realize it
it's
was that
straight
big.
on,
Yeah.
it looks like a regular cone. But if you turn it sideways, instead of going to a point, it goes into a straight line at the top.
Hmm.
Now, if you cut it in half, this was a nice little 3D model that was made for me by uh, Alan O'Neill. You get a half, and then if you slice it diagonally, if I can get the thing apart, you get this shape on the cut face, which I hope you can see fairly
Yep.
clearly.
Yep.
And it's a sort of teardropish shape. And that is the shape that was used to help form the various sections. And it was sort of, it rotated as it went along the ship, along this conic line.
Okay.
That's the simplest way I can explain it. If you're really interested, there's the article in the Mariner's Mirror that Effie and I put out 2, 3 years ago,
Yep.
explaining how we had determined how this was used to form the hull shapes.
Yeah, I'll post a link to that in the notes. And so, as I recall, I think this sort of went, this knowledge went dormant for a while. Is that right? Like,
Oh, it was completely mystery, complete mystery. So, in a sense, I don't want to make it sound too dramatic. We rediscovered it.
yeah.
It took a lot of trial and error. The other thing was we fortunately had a uh, scan of a contemporary model. So we had all these sections, and we could then sort of reverse engineer it, if you like, to find out what proportion of this strange shape was used and how it was used. And we gradually figured it out over the course of about 2, 3 years.
Okay.
It was an interesting puzzle to solve.
And did you use that to draft your own plans for
Yes.
Fubs? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's the plans that we also sell it with the book too. Yeah.
Right. And in a sense, that was the proof of the pudding that that system works perfectly
Right. And
because it
when do
produced
you
a fair
suspect?
hull.
I'm sorry?
Because it produced a fair hull.
Right. And when did you suspect that they stopped using that? I mean, was it just when the whole ship design changed and
I don't know. I can't answer that question for you.
okay. And
Yeah.
and how do you pronounce it? It
Which
it's like a conocunus or something?
Con Conocunius.
Conocunius. Okay. Uh, so that's the official thing, but we can call it the ship model, the shipwright's wedge.
Yeah.
Good. Um, and and so you did the plans and then you built the model for the book. Where's the model now?
That model is out in Washington State somewhere.
So that was a commission.
Uh, Actually, that one was a sort of semi-commission.
Okay.
Um, we wanted to make a model of it, and we had somebody who was generous enough to underwrite it
Got it. Got
for
it.
the model.
Okay. And what's next? I know you and Effie are working on something for us. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, this is going to be a very thick book, possibly 2 volumes, on all the royal yachts of Charles II. He had 25 of them in 25 years of his reign.
Wow.
Um, and most of them were not well identified in various paintings and other contemporary pieces that we have. And Effie and a number of other people as well have spent time to positively identify each of them in the various paintings. Now, some of the drawings by Van der Velde are actually labeled with the names of the ships, but
Hmm.
not all of them are. So it's been quite a job to sort out the 25. And Effie's done a lot of research over the years on the history of them. So this is going to be more of a history book than a model maker's book. There will be drawings scale drawings in there, but they won't be a complete set of drawings because there's so much we don't know about them, like their internal layout. We can
Hmm.
only have a rough idea and speculate. So it won't be primarily for model makers, it'll be more for historians, but there should be enough in there to interest model makers as well.
And yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And I'm curious, isn't it unusual that there aren't plans for all of these? Because I thought the British were maniacal about, logging everything and making plans and
They were, but there are very few plans before 1700 that have survived.
okay.
There are references to drafts earlier than that, but they've either been destroyed, vanished, sands of time. Be wonderful if one showed up, but there are relatively few things on paper that
Okay.
still exist at this point that we know of.
And yeah, I'm kind of curious because you alluded to it with looking at Vandervelde's art and things, and you mentioned it in the Fubbs book. Like, how, when you're doing research on old ships like this, how much can you trust the artwork of the time to be truly um, descriptive of the ship itself?
Well, in the case of the Van der Vels, they were very familiar with things maritime. They weren't sort of landsmen, sort of their impression of a ship. So yes, pretty accurate. And of course, pre-photography days, and the client, in which most cases was the king, would who was also very knowledgeable in things maritime, he would have not accepted things that were not, I won't say photographically accurate, but pretty close to that.
Hmm.
So most of the time, it's pretty reliable.
Okay. Okay.
Some of the quick sketches are less reliable, but certainly the more finished sketches and drawings and the paintings are pretty reliable.
Even from a rigging standpoint, or
Oh, yes,
interesting.
absolutely.
Yeah. Um, and sort of keeping on that subject of research, like particularly for somebody who maybe has not built a scratch model yet,
Mhm.
um, how would what kind of advice would you give from in terms of approaching the research aspect of a build?
Well, I think people are very lucky these days. There's so much more information available than when I was starting out. I mean, just the books SeaWatch alone puts out have a huge amount of information in them. So there's lots of secondary uh, information. For primary information, you'd still have to go to um, you know the British Library if it's a British subject that you're looking at, and the plans that the Maritime Museum hold for primary information. And there are a lot of primary books that have been republished in facsimile form, such as steel,
Hmm.
that are available, and a lot of it's online now. So you don't actually have to get off your seat too much to even do a lot of research these days.
Right.
So it's a very different game than it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and going back to the Stuart Royal Yachts that the book that you're working on now, potentially 2 volumes. Any that What do you think, you guys? I think you're talking later this year, correct? On
Yeah, we're in a pretty advanced state now. I've got all but 6 chapters of the book laid out at this point. After that, we have to go through the text with a fine tooth comb and pick up things that we've missed and make minor tweaks to it. But we're getting there. Yeah.
Great, great. And do you think anything's next after that? Not just from a book standpoint, but from, are you still going to be building? What's kind of on your horizon?
Well, well, what you see behind me is probably my last professional build,
Okay.
and I'll explain the reason why. I've had arthritis in my hands for almost 50 years now,
Mm,
and we're getting to the point where I just cannot maintain the standard that I would like.
mm,
So I'm probably not going to build after this one. I might do the odd thing for fun, but
mm.
not for a professional point of view. Uh, Probably do more writing and research. I'm also going to plan to get back to painting again.
Mm,
I used to paint a lot in my earlier days, but I haven't done much for some time now, and I think it's probably time to get back to that because my hands can do that even if they can't do the fine work that they were doing. And in that regard, I'm trying to be realistic about it. Um, Greg will be rigging this model.
Okay.
I'm not rigging it. Uh, I just really, these won't do it anymore.
Do you want to
Uh,
tell us
and,
about the model?
and the irony is, my hand's still steady as a rock.
Wow. Yeah, might never have been. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the model?
Yes, that is the South Carolina. It was a ship that was designed by a Frenchman, built by the Dutch in Amsterdam, gotten out of there with great difficulty because it was too deep for the shallow waters
Mm,
around Amsterdam. It took them 2 years to figure out to empty it, seal up one side, turn it on its side and tow it out to deep
wow.
water, then upright it again, reload it up and fit it out. The Americans bought it as part of their Revolutionary War effort. Uh, so it was sailed across. John Paul Jones was desperate to have command of this ship, and he was apparently so obnoxious he didn't get it. um, One of the signatories to having that built for the Americans was Benjamin Franklin, by the way,
Mm,
who was quite active in France and Europe at the time.
yeah.
Um, so South Carolina was an interesting vessel. It was the first heavy frigate.
Okay.
Um, it was armed with European 36 pounds, which is actually near a 40-pounder cannon, 28 of them. A lot of firepower on this thing, and all on one continuous gun deck. The problem with the ship was, as you can probably see from behind me, it's very, very fine both at the bow and the stern.
Hmm.
Didn't have enough buoyancy. So what happened? It hogged very quickly.
Mm,
It was surveyed by Humphreys in Philadelphia when it arrived, which is why I have the lines of it from his notes. And
okay.
he noted the scantlings. And he was quite critical of it. But this was the precursor to all those heavy American frigates, Constitution, Constellation, and so on. This was the model, except he didn't make them as fine at each end, so that they supported. And also there was diagonal bracing, I believe, in those ships.
Interesting.
So this was the prototype.
Interesting. And it's actually very, I was going to ask how you got the plans because the U.S. Navy was not good. They were the opposite of the Brits from making their plans available. Like you can't find plans of most of American ships, correct?
That's right. Well, in this case, Humphreys had a notebook and he drew a number of sections in them and the distances apart they were.
Okay.
I think there were about 8 sections. And I had to reconstitute it, if you like, from those elements. And he did a surprisingly good job because there was very little fairing up required from his sections. They were pretty
Interesting.
good. Once I realized just how fine the ends were.
Yeah. And she's big model. Are you're going to do a full rig, full mast on that?
It will be fully rigged, yes.
That is a large. My wife would not
Yes.
let me have that in my house.
Yeah, it's going into a more public space, not a private collection.
Got it. Will we be allowed to know where it is at some point when it's finished? Go see it.
um, if the client is agreeable, yes.
Cool. That'd be neat. Um, so I'm kind of curious, and one thing I'm trying to ask, like everybody I bring on to this is sort of how we can keep the hobby going. I mean, there's luminaries like you and Rob and a whole bunch of folks, and unfortunately, you're all retiring. Like, what
Yeah.
do you see next? How, is there any young Turks that you know of that are up and comers, or just sort of, how do we
Well,
tackle
there
the
are
gray going?
certainly a couple I'm aware of who are your age group, or perhaps even slightly younger. There are not many of you, but there are, and hopefully, you bring along others. It was very interesting because this morning I was reading the national paper, the Globe and Mail here, and I had an article, and I've extracted these stats from it. Uh, Leisure time activities in people over 15 today. And out of all their leisure time in a day, 48 minutes was spent with anything active versus 120 minutes passive.
Oh, wow.
So they spent 30 minutes daily on things like the computer, doing stuff actively, 18 minutes on any art, hobby, writing of any kind, then 102 minutes watching TV or video,
Oh, jeez.
and 18 minutes reading or listening to music or radio. So that's the an average for those over 15. So there's very little active
Yeah.
happening versus passive. And until I think people get tired of just sitting there passively taking stuff in and actually want to do something actively, is it likely to change much? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I just think of my own kids and stuff and the amount, they do some artwork and things, but like so many people are just on computers and on their phones all the time.
Yeah.
I know when we go and you're speaking at the joint clubs this year up in New London, and the past few years, there's actually been, I think, like a 12-year-old, model
Yes.
who's been coming
I
and
met him and his family a couple of times, uh, previous New London uh, meetings,
yeah,
and was made it very obvious to the parents how pleased I was that they were encouraging of this,
absolutely.
because that is where it all starts. That's where it started for me. My father was encouraging. The people I met that were in the business were encouraging.
Yep. Yep. I
But
agree. And
but we need
hopefully,
more people like that young man.
exactly, exactly. And it's one of the things I'm trying to do with this and get my sister or my daughter keeps saying, well, you need to go on TikTok, and I have yet to figure out TikTok, so I don't know, but
I stay away from social media. I simply don't have the time for it.
exactly, exactly. Well, listen, this has been, I've really enjoyed the time you've given us and everything, you've brought to SeaWatch, obviously, but, really brought to the hobby and, really enjoyed it. Any place where people can either follow your work or any kind of parting messages you want to give to folks?
Well, as I say, I don't do social media because I just simply don't have time for it. I suppose if they Google my name, there'd be all kinds of things come up on the net, but that's about it, really.
And you
Um,
can always get the books and SeaWatch.
Absolutely, yes.
Well,
Do
David, this has
buy
been
them.
an absolute pleasure. I appreciate the time. I'd love to have you back when the new book gets published and we can talk more about that. And we'll have you back if you're amenable to it.
Well, thank you very much for having me and thinking of me to put me on when I think of so many other people that are worthy subjects for you.
No, your name was actively requested many times after I launched the first one. So
Well, I'm very flattered, I must say. Anyway, thank you so much for having me on and asking some interesting questions of me.
great. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining. And hopefully you like it and tell all your friends about it. And we have more coming your way. So thank you. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the interview with David. I certainly had a great time doing it, and tried to keep this one a little shorter, based on some of the feedback from the last one. So, hope you enjoyed it. And also, I'd just like to take a moment. If you might have heard we mentioned the Joint Clubs meeting this April, actually, in New London, Connecticut. So if you happen to be up in New London, I believe it's April 26th. It's a really great conference. Usually runs from about 9 to two or three. Usually have like over 100 models there. Ola Bacharov is going to be there usually. You might know her videos on YouTube. And it's really just an all-around great day. Meet a lot of people, learn a lot of things. David and Greg are going to be the keynote speakers, and there's some information about it here. And I really hope you can join us in my club. Actually, the New Jersey Ship Model Up Society is hosting it this year, so I'll be the MC, and hope to see you there. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And that's it. So thanks for watching, and we'll be back with another one soon. Thanks.